The practice room fell silent the exact second Hyunjin grabbed Felix's trembling hand, not because they were shocked to see skin touch skin, but because Felix smiled afterward, a small smile. Soft, honest, dangerous. The music from the speakers continued for 3 more seconds before Bang Chan slammed his hand against the control panel hard enough to cut the song mid-beat. The sudden silence rang louder than the bass ever had. Sweat dripped from the mirrors. The cold white ceiling lights turned every exhausted face pale. Hyunjin didn't let go. Felix stood beside him, breathing hard after hours of dance practice, strands of blonde hair sticking to his forehead. His chest rose unevenly beneath his black shirt, and yet his eyes remained fixed on Hyunjin's hand wrapped around his own like it was the only stable thing left in the room. Then Lino laughed once, sharp, bitter. "Seriously," he muttered. The atmosphere cracked instantly. Changbin looked away first, jaw tight enough to twitch. Han crossed his arms against his chest and stared at the floor. Suman's expression flattened into something unreadable, while In quietly stepped backward as if distancing himself from a fire before it spread. Bang Chan inhaled slowly. "Practice is over." Nobody moved. Hyunjin finally looked up. "What?" "I said practice is over." Smile disappeared immediately. That was the first thing Hyunjin noticed, not the anger in Chan's voice. Not the suffocating tension flooding the room. Not the way Lino shoved his water bottle into his bag so violently that water spilled onto the floor. No, he noticed Felix withdrawing his hand first. And somehow, that hurt more. Outside, rain hammered against the building windows hard enough to blur the city lights into smears of silver and gold. Thunder rolled across Seoul like distant explosions while the members silently gathered their things. Nobody spoke to Hyunjin. Not directly, not even Felix. Especially not Felix. He kept his head lowered as he folded towels and packed cables with mechanical precision, his freckles nearly invisible beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. To strangers, Felix looked calm. But Hyunjin knew him too well. Felix always cleaned things when he was anxious, small things, precise things, because if his hands stayed busy, his thoughts wouldn't destroy him. Hyunjin swallowed. "Licks." Froze for half a second before continuing to zip up his bag. "Should go before the storm gets worse," Felix said quietly, not cold, not warm, careful, too careful. Lino scoffed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Yeah," he muttered. "Wouldn't want people talking." That finally snapped something inside Hyunjin. "What's your problem?" The question echoed across the room. Nobody answered immediately. Bang Chan rubbed his exhausted face. "Hyunjin, no, seriously." Hyunjin stepped forward. "Why is everyone acting insane?" "Because you keep crossing lines," Changbin said flatly. The words hit harder than Hyunjin expected. Crossing lines, as if Felix were something forbidden, as if touching him had become a crime. Hyunjin laughed once, breathless with disbelief. "I held his hand," looked up sharply. "Exactly." Tension twisted tighter. Felix finally spoke. "Guys, stop." Nobody listened. Because this had never truly been about one hand. It had been building for months, the lingering glances during interviews. The way Hyunjin unconsciously searched for Felix in every crowded room. The way Felix's entire expression softened whenever Hyunjin entered a space. The way they gravitated toward each other even in silence. Fans noticed, staff noticed, managers noticed. And worst of all, the members noticed. Bang Chan walked toward Hyunjin slowly, exhaustion heavy in his eyes. "You think this only affects you?" Hyunjin stared at him. Chan rarely looked angry, disappointed, maybe, concerned often. But this was fear. "You think scandals only destroy one person," Chan continued quietly. "You think people won't tear Felix apart too?" Felix lowered his eyes instantly. That tiny movement made Hyunjin's stomach twist painfully. Because Felix always did that when he blamed himself, always. Even as a trainee, Felix apologized for things that were never his fault. For crying too much, for struggling with Korean, for getting sick, for existing too loudly in rooms where people expected silence. Hyunjin remembered every single apology and hated every one of them. "He didn't do anything wrong," Hyunjin said. Lino's voice sliced through the room immediately. "That's exactly why this is dangerous." Rain crashed harder outside. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Felix quietly picked up his bag. "I'll wait downstairs." Walked out before Hyunjin could stop him. The door clicked shut softly behind him, and suddenly the room felt unbearably empty. Hyunjin turned toward the others, fury burning beneath his skin. "You're all acting like he's some kind of problem." "No," Suman said quietly. "We're acting like you're in love with him." Silence, absolute silence. Even the rain outside seemed distant now. Hyunjin couldn't breathe, not because the accusation shocked him, but because hearing it out loud made it real. His pulse thundered violently in his ears. Nobody moved, nobody blinked, and deep down, Hyunjin realized something terrifying. Not one member looked surprised by the accusation, because they had known long before he did. The dorm felt colder that night. Maybe because the rain never stopped. Maybe because Felix locked himself inside his room immediately after returning home. Or maybe because Hyunjin couldn't stop hearing Sumin. Voice repeating inside his skull, "You're in love with him." Hyunjin sat alone on the living room couch long after midnight, hoodie damp from the storm, staring at the city lights outside the window. He tried to deny it, tried to crush the thought before it fully formed. But memories kept surfacing against his will. Felix falling asleep against his shoulder during overseas flights. Felix laughing breathlessly while baking ruined brownies at 3 a.m. Felix quietly covering Hyunjin with blankets whenever he passed out in the studio. Felix's voice whispering, "You worked hard today after terrible performances. Felix, Felix, Felix." Every thought led back to him. Hyunjin covered his face with both hands. "Damn it. You should sleep." Hyunjin looked up instantly. Felix stood near the hallway entrance wearing oversized gray pajamas, blonde hair slightly damp from a shower. He looked tired. Fragile, almost beautiful. That realization alone made Hyunjin feel sick with himself. Felix walked closer carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. "You're overthinking again," Felix murmured. Hyunjin laughed weakly. "Easy for you to say." Sat beside him quietly. Close enough for warmth, far enough to feel distant. For a while neither spoke. Only rain filled the silence. Then Felix whispered something so softly Hyunjin almost missed it. "They're not wrong, you know." Hyunjin's chest tightened instantly. Felix stared ahead at the dark window. "If people misunderstand us," he continued quietly, "everyone gets hurt." It was again that instinctive self-sacrifice. Felix always believed pain became smaller if he carried it alone. Hyunjin hated that. He turned toward him sharply. "Why are you talking like we did something bad?" Felix finally looked at him. And Hyunjin's anger vanished immediately, because Felix looked terrified, not of scandals, not of fans, not even of the members. He looked terrified of Hyunjin himself. Or more specifically, terrified of what Hyunjin might feel. Felix forced a small smile. "You know how people are." "No," Hyunjin said quietly. "I know how you are." Blinked slowly. "You always run first," Hyunjin whispered. "Before anyone can reject you." Something inside Felix cracked visibly. He looked away immediately. And Hyunjin suddenly understood. This wasn't new for Felix either. Maybe neither of them had been brave enough to name it, but it had existed for a long time in lingering touches. Shared silence, sleepless nights together. In every moment their eyes found each other first. Felix stood up abruptly. "I should sleep." Hyunjin caught his wrist before he could leave. Instinct, pure instinct. Felix froze, their eyes met. And suddenly the entire world narrowed into that single fragile second. Rain against glass, warm skin beneath trembling fingers, breathing too close. Hyunjin's heart pounded violently enough to hurt. Felix's lips parted slightly as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. Then footsteps echoed from the hallway, both of them pulled apart instantly. Bang Chan stood there silently. The exhaustion in his face looked almost painful now. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Chan looked directly at Hyunjin. "You need to decide how much Felix means to you," he said quietly. Hyunjin frowned. Chan's eyes darkened. "If this keeps going," he whispered, "you're going to destroy each other." Hyunjin didn't sleep. The apartment stayed silent after Bang Chan disappeared back into his room, but the words he left behind kept echoing through Hyunjin's chest like bruises. "You're going to destroy each other." Outside, dawn slowly bled into the gray sky, rainwater sliding down the windows in endless trails. The city looked blurred and distant beneath the storm, like Seoul itself was trying not to witness what was happening inside the dorm. Hyunjin sat motionless on the couch until morning. He kept replaying Felix's expression. That fear, not fear of being hated, fear of being loved back. The realization hollowed something inside him. By 7 a.m., the dorm began waking up. Cabinet doors opened. Footsteps crossed the hallway. Someone started the coffee machine. Normally, those small sounds felt comforting, proof that despite schedules, exhaustion, and pressure, they still had each other. Today it felt like walking through broken glass. Hyunjin finally stood when he heard Felix's room door open. For half a second their eyes met across the kitchen. Felix instantly looked away. That hurt more than any argument. "Morning," Felix murmured softly. His voice sounded careful again. Too careful. Hyunjin hated it. Lee entered next, immediately noticing the tension. His expression darkened slightly before he grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. Nobody spoke. Even Changbin, usually loud in the mornings, remained silent while scrolling through his phone at the counter. The atmosphere suffocated the room. Then Han suddenly cursed under his breath. Everyone looked up. Bang Chan asked from the hallway. Han slowly turned his phone around. There's already a post online. The room froze instantly. Hyunjin's stomach dropped. Felix visibly paled. Han swallowed hard before reading aloud. Does Hyunjin always look at Felix like that? A cold silence spread across the kitchen. Hyunjin reached for the phone. His pulse spiked the second he saw the screenshots, photos, dozens of them. Hyunjin staring at Felix during concerts. Felix smiling whenever Hyunjin touched him. Their hands brushing accidentally backstage. One blurry image from yesterday's practice room. Hyunjin holding Felix's hand, the comments beneath it moved even faster. They're acting weird lately. This is making the group uncomfortable. Looks obsessed with him. No, Hyunjin is the problem. Something feels wrong. Other members seem annoyed. Each sentence felt like a knife slowly twisting deeper. Felix stepped backward. Sorry. Apology slipped out automatically, instinctively, painfully. Hyunjin looked up sharply. Stop apologizing. Felix already looked shattered. Bang Chan took the phone from Han immediately. Nobody responds to anything. Ignore it. Too late for that. Lee muttered quietly. Felix turned around suddenly. I need air. Felix. But the door closed before Hyunjin could reach him. The silence afterward felt unbearable. Hyunjin immediately grabbed his hoodie. Bang Chan blocked the doorway. Hyunjin stared at him in disbelief. Move! He needs space. He needs someone. He needs this situation to stop getting worse, Chan snapped. That finally ignited Hyunjin's temper. You think abandoning him helps? Chan's expression tightened instantly for a moment. Exhaustion disappeared from his face entirely, revealing something much heavier underneath: fear, real fear. You think I don't know Felix? Chan asked quietly. You think I haven't watched him blame himself for every bad thing since he became a trainee? Hyunjin's breathing slowed. Chan stepped closer. If you care about him, he whispered, then stop pulling him deeper into this. The words landed harder than shouting ever could, because deep down, Hyunjin knew Chan believed he was protecting Felix. And maybe that was the worst part. Maybe everyone thought Hyunjin himself was the danger. Hours later, Felix still hadn't returned. Managers began calling. Schedules were delayed. Nobody could focus. Even Lee stopped pretending not to worry. Hyunjin sat in the van gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. No messages, no calls, nothing. Every minute stretched longer, then finally one message appeared: Felix. Hyunjin's heartbeat stumbled violently as he opened it. I'm okay. Don't come looking for me. Hyunjin immediately typed back. Where are you? No response. Another message. Please. That single word shattered him. Please. Not angry, not cold, desperate. Hyunjin stared at the screen for several long seconds before locking his phone silently, because he understood what Felix was really asking. Please don't make this harder. The photos spread faster by evening. Fan accounts reposted them. Edits appeared online. Speculation grew uglier every hour. Managers held emergency meetings while the members sat silently inside the practice room pretending to rehearse. Nobody had energy left to dance. Hyunjin kept missing steps. Felix still hadn't returned. Finally, around 10 p.m., the studio door opened quietly. Everyone looked up instantly. Felix walked in wearing a black hoodie and mask, rainwater dripping from his sleeves. His blonde hair was damp again from another storm outside, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Relief flooded the room so hard it almost hurt. But Felix didn't look at Hyunjin once. He bowed slightly toward the managers. Sorry. Again, always apologizing. The managers eventually left after discussing damage control and future schedules. The second the door closed, tension rushed back into the room immediately. Changbin sighed heavily. This is getting bad, lowered his head. I know. No, Hyunjin interrupted sharply. Stop acting like this is your fault. Looked exhausted now. Then whose fault is it? The question sliced straight through him. Nobody answered because nobody truly knew anymore. Lee suddenly stood up. You want the truth? He asked quietly. The room went still. Lee looked directly at Hyunjin. You stopped seeing the group clearly a long time ago. Hyunjin frowned. You only see Felix now. Eyes widened instantly. Hyung, and you, Lee continued, turning toward Felix. Keep letting him. The words hit both of them brutally. Hyunjin stood up immediately. Enough! No, Lee snapped back. You need to hear this. Years of buried frustration finally surfaced in his voice. We all care about Felix. That's exactly why this is hard to watch. Looked completely frozen now, Lee No inhaled shakily before continuing quieter this time. He changes around you. Hyunjin's anger faltered slightly. Stops thinking about himself, Lee No whispered. He'd destroy himself if it meant protecting you. Turned away instantly, and that silence alone confirmed everything. Hyunjin felt something crack open inside his chest because Lee No was right. Felix would sacrifice himself without hesitation. His reputation, his happiness, everything, just to keep Hyunjin safe. The realization terrified him. Suddenly Felix spoke, very softly. Maybe we should stay apart for a while. The entire room went silent. Hyunjin stared at him. What? Felix couldn't meet his eyes. Until things calmed down. No. Answer came instantly. Felix swallowed hard. Hyunjin, no. Voice broke this time. For the first time all day, Felix finally looked at him fully, and Hyunjin immediately wished he hadn't because Felix looked heartbroken already, like he had been preparing himself for this pain long before today. Hyunjin stepped closer slowly. I don't care what people say. But I do, Felix whispered. That single sentence destroyed him, because Felix had always cared too much about everyone, fans, members, staff, strangers online, everyone except himself. Hyunjin's chest tightened painfully. You think distancing yourself fixes this? He asked quietly. Felix looked down. Maybe. No, Hyunjin whispered. It just hurts us sooner. The room fell completely silent again. Nobody interrupted now, not Bang Chan, not Lee No, not anyone. Because the truth finally stood exposed between them, raw and undeniable. And for the first time, nobody could pretend this was just friendship anymore. Felix's eyes slowly filled with tears. He looked horrified by them immediately, wiping them away before they could fall. That broke Hyunjin completely. Without thinking, he reached for him again. Felix stepped backward instinctively, not rejecting him, protecting him, and somehow that hurt even more. Hyunjin stopped moving. For several long seconds, neither of them breathed properly. Then Felix whispered the words Hyunjin would remember for the rest of his life. If you keep looking at me like that, voice trembled, I'll never be able to leave.
The confession shattered whatever fragile control Hyunjin still had left. The practice room suddenly felt too small, too bright, too suffocating. Felix stood there breathing unevenly, eyes glassy beneath the harsh ceiling lights, and Hyunjin realized with terrifying clarity that Felix had been trying to leave him for a long time. Not physically, emotionally, quietly, piece by piece, before it became impossible, but it was already impossible. Hyunjin could see it in the way Felix's fingers trembled at his sides, in the way his voice broke after every sentence, in the way he kept stepping backward while looking devastated every time distance actually formed between them. That wasn't someone trying to escape, that was someone begging to be stopped. The silence inside the room grew unbearable. Finally Bang Chan stood up slowly. That's enough for tonight. Nobody argued. Even Lee No looked exhausted now. The members quietly gathered their things one by one, avoiding eye contact as if they had accidentally witnessed something too personal to survive daylight. Hyunjin never stopped looking at Felix, and Felix never fully looked away from him either. That was the problem. No matter how hard they tried, they always found each other again. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The city streets shimmered beneath reflections of neon signs and passing headlights, water still dripping from rooftops into puddles below. Cold night air flooded Hyunjin's lungs as the members walked silently toward the vans. Managers spoke in hushed voices nearby. Schedules were being rearranged, interviews postponed, damage control already beginning. Hyunjin barely heard any of it, because Felix walked 3 steps ahead of him with his hood pulled low, shoulders tense like he was carrying something unbearably heavy alone. The urge to reach for him again almost physically hurt, but Hyunjin stayed still, for him. At the dorm, nobody lingered in the living room. Doors closed quietly one after another until only silence remained. Hyunjin sat on the edge of his bed staring blankly at the floor. He couldn't think clearly anymore. Every emotion inside him felt tangled together. Anger, fear, guilt, longing, and beneath all of it love, raw and undeniable now. He laughed bitterly under his breath. Of course it had become love. How could it not? Loving Felix had happened slowly enough to feel natural and suddenly enough to destroy him. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Hyunjin looked up instantly. Felix stood outside the half-open door. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Felix quietly asked, "Can I come in?" Hyunjin nodded immediately. Felix entered slowly, closing the door behind him with careful hands. He wore oversized black sweatpants now, blonde hair still slightly damp from another shower, freckles faint beneath tired eyes. He looked exhausted beyond words, but he still came here to Hyunjin, always to Hyunjin. That realization alone nearly broke him apart. Felix remained standing near the door at first, nervous, guarded, like he didn't trust himself anymore. Hyunjin's chest tightened painfully. You don't have to stand that far away. Look down instantly. I think I do. Honesty in his voice hurt. Hyunjin swallowed hard. Are you scared of me? Felix's eyes widened immediately. No, too fast, too emotional. Hyunjin stood slowly from the bed. Then what are you scared of? Felix opened his mouth, then closed it again, because the answer was obvious. Everything, the members, fans, rumors, the future, the possibility that this feeling could consume both of them completely. Hyunjin stepped closer carefully. Felix didn't move this time. That tiny detail shattered him quietly. You know what the worst part is? Hyunjin whispered. Felix looked at him silently. I tried to stop. Voice cracked softly. I noticed myself getting too attached months ago. Felix's breathing visibly slowed. Hyunjin laughed weakly, eyes burning now. I told myself I was imagining things. Memories flooded him against his will, watching Felix asleep during flights because he looked peaceful for once, feeling relieved every time Felix smiled after difficult schedules. Wanting to protect him from every cruel comment online, every exhausting expectation, every moment Felix doubted his own worth. Hyunjin looked away briefly. But every time you smiled at me, he whispered, I forgot how to leave. His eyes filled instantly. The room fell silent except for uneven breathing. Then Felix spoke so quietly it almost sounded painful. You make me selfish. Hyunjin looked up sharply. Felix's hands trembled slightly now. When I'm with you. He continued softly. I stop thinking about what's right. The confession settled heavily between them, because Felix always thought about what was right. Always he carried responsibility like chains around his own throat. Protect the group, protect the members, protect the fans, protect everyone, even if it destroyed him. Hyunjin suddenly understood why the others were afraid, because Felix would absolutely sacrifice himself if this spiraled further. And Hyunjin would let the world burn before letting Felix go. That imbalance terrified everyone, including Felix himself. A painful silence followed, then Hyunjin finally asked the question he had been avoiding all night. Do you want me to stop? Felix froze completely. The air between them tightened instantly. Hyunjin's pulse thundered violently now, but he forced himself to continue. If you tell me to walk away, he whispered, I will. The lie nearly killed him. Because he already knew he couldn't, not really, not completely, but for Felix he would try. Felix stared at him for several long seconds, then something inside him finally cracked. You're cruel, he whispered shakily. Hyunjin blinked in confusion. Tears finally slipped down Felix's face. You say things like that, Felix continued brokenly, when you know I don't want you to leave. Vulnerability in his voice destroyed every remaining wall between them. Hyunjin moved without thinking. This time when he reached for Felix, Felix didn't step away. Their hands met first, warm skin, shaking fingers. Then suddenly Felix grabbed Hyunjin's hoodie tightly with both hands like he was holding onto the last stable thing in the world. And Hyunjin finally pulled him close. The moment their bodies touched, Felix exhaled shakily against his shoulder like he had been holding his breath for weeks. Hyunjin closed his eyes instantly. Relief hit him so hard it hurt. Felix fit against him too naturally, too perfectly. Like every sleepless night had been leading here, neither spoke. They simply stood there holding each other while the city lights flickered softly beyond the window. Hyunjin could feel Felix's heartbeat racing through the thin fabric between them, fast, fragile, real. Then Felix whispered something against his shoulder that nearly shattered him completely. I hated watching you look at other people. Hyunjin's breath caught. Felix laughed weakly afterward, embarrassed by his own honesty. See, he murmured, selfish. Hyunjin pulled back just enough to look at him. He said softly, human. Their faces were too close now, close enough for Hyunjin to notice the tiny scar beneath Felix's eye, close enough to feel warm breath against trembling lips, close enough to ruin everything. Or maybe save it, neither of them knew anymore. Felix's eyes slowly dropped toward Hyunjin's mouth before instantly pulling away again like he hated himself for it. That tiny movement almost destroyed Hyunjin's self-control. Lix looked terrified now, not because he wanted this, because he did, and they both knew it. That was the dangerous part. Hyunjin lifted one trembling hand carefully toward Felix's face, slow enough to let him stop it. Felix didn't. His eyes closed briefly the second Hyunjin's fingers touched his cheek. A tiny broken sound escaped Felix's throat, and Hyunjin realized then, Felix had been lonely for much longer than anyone noticed. The thought cracked something deep inside him. So when Felix finally opened his eyes again and whispered, "This is a bad idea," Hyunjin answered honestly, "I know." Neither of them moved away. The room felt impossibly quiet after that, not peaceful, fragile, like one wrong breath could shatter everything standing between them. Hyunjin's hand still rested against Felix's cheek, warm skin trembling faintly beneath his fingers. Felix looked overwhelmed now, eyes glossy with emotions he had spent too long trying to bury. Outside the window, Seoul glittered beneath the midnight sky, distant traffic humming softly below like another world entirely. Inside this room only Felix existed, only Felix's breathing, Felix's heartbeat, Felix's terrified honesty. Hyunjin had never wanted anything this badly in his life, and that terrified him too. Felix swallowed hard before finally stepping backward, not far, just enough to breathe properly again. "We shouldn't do this," he whispered. Hyunjin stared at him silently. Felix laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. "The worst part is that I don't even know what this is anymore." Neither did Hyunjin. That was the truth. This feeling had grown too slowly to notice and too deeply to escape. Friendship didn't explain why Hyunjin felt angry whenever Felix forced himself to smile through exhaustion. Friendship didn't explain why Felix remembered every tiny thing about him, the exact tea he drank before schedules, the songs he replayed while anxious, the way Hyunjin scratched his wrist whenever stress became unbearable. And friendship definitely didn't explain why both of them looked ready to fall apart after standing 2 feet apart for one single day. Felix sat down slowly on the edge of Hyunjin's bed, elbows resting on his knees. For the first time that night he looked completely drained, not idle Felix, not sunshine Felix, just Felix, tired, scared, human. Hyunjin sat beside him quietly, their shoulders brushed lightly, neither moved away. Felix stared at the floor for a long time before speaking again. "Do you know what I was really doing today?" Hyunjin looked at him carefully. "When you disappeared," Felix nodded slowly. "I went to the Han River." Hyunjin's chest tightened instantly. Felix forced a small smile. "I wasn't doing anything dangerous." Still, the answer unsettled him deeply. Felix leaned back slightly, eyes distant now. "I just needed somewhere quiet." Hyunjin waited silently. Felix inhaled shakily. "I kept reading the comments." "Of course he did." Hyunjin closed his eyes briefly in frustration. Felix always read everything, every hateful message, every criticism, every accusation, as if punishing himself somehow made the words hurt less. "It got bad?" Hyunjin asked softly. Felix laughed weakly again. "One person said I ruin people." The sentence landed like broken glass. Hyunjin's jaw tightened instantly. Felix kept talking before he could interrupt. "The stupid thing is," his voice cracked slightly, "part of me believed them." Hyunjin turned toward him sharply. "Look down immediately." "That's the problem," he whispered. "I always become too much eventually. Too emotional, too sensitive, too attached." Hyunjin suddenly understood this fear hadn't started now. This was older, much older, years of feeling replaceable, years of thinking affection always came with conditions, years of believing people would leave once he became difficult to love. The realization hurt more than Hyunjin expected. He reached for Felix's hand again carefully. This time Felix held on immediately, no hesitation, almost desperate. "You are not ruining me," Hyunjin whispered. Felix's eyes shut tightly. "You don't know that yet." "I do." The certainty in Hyunjin's voice made Felix finally look at him again, and for one unbearable moment Hyunjin saw how badly Felix wanted to believe him, that almost destroyed him. "Lix," he said softly, "look at me." Bathed slowly. "You are the safest thing that's ever happened to me." Complete silence. Felix's expression broke instantly. He looked away before tears could fall again, but Hyunjin had already seen too much. Seen how deeply those words affected him, seen how starved he was for them. Hyunjin's chest ached violently. "Long," Felix suddenly whispered. Hyunjin frowned slightly. "What? How long have you felt this way?" The question lingered heavily between them. Hyunjin thought about lying, thought about making it smaller, simpler, less terrifying, but Felix deserved honesty now, so Hyunjin answered quietly. "I think," he swallowed hard. "I realized it the night you got sick during tour." Blinked slowly. It had happened nearly a year ago. A terrible overseas schedule. Felix had forced himself through rehearsals despite a fever until he nearly collapsed backstage afterward. Everyone panicked. Managers called doctors, staff rushed everywhere. But all Hyunjin remembered was the fear, pure, horrifying fear. "I thought something happened to you," Hyunjin whispered. The memory still made his chest tighten painfully. Felix stared at him silently. "I couldn't breathe properly until you woke up." Felix's fingers tightened around his hand. Hyunjin continued before he lost courage. "And afterward," he laughed weakly. "Every time you smiled at me it felt like surviving something." looked completely shattered now, not disgusted, not uncomfortable, just emotionally overwhelmed. Hyunjin realized then that Felix probably remembered the moment too, the hospital room, Hyunjin refusing to leave, sleeping in the chair beside him for hours, holding Felix's hand while thinking he was asleep. Back then, neither of them had acknowledged what it meant. Maybe they were too afraid. Maybe they already knew. Felix finally whispered, "I thought I imagined it." Hyunjin's breath caught slightly. Felix smiled sadly. "The way you looked at me after that." Their eyes met again. And suddenly every hidden feeling between them felt exposed beyond repair. The air itself seemed warmer now, dangerously intimate. Hyunjin's thumb brushed unconsciously against Felix's knuckles. Felix inhaled shakily. "You really make this hard," he murmured. Hyunjin almost smiled. "You started it." Looked genuinely offended for half a second. "I did not. You held my hand first last winter." Froze instantly, colour rose faintly into his cheeks. "That was because you were anxious before the award show. You intertwined our fingers. You were shaking. You kissed my forehead afterward." Immediately covered his face with one hand. "Oh my God." Hyunjin laughed softly for the first time all day. The sound felt unfamiliar after everything that happened. Felix peeked through his fingers, embarrassed beyond belief now. "I thought you forgot that. Remember everything about you." The words slipped out naturally, and the second they did, silence returned because they were too honest, too real. Felix slowly lowered his hand again, his expression softened into something heartbreakingly vulnerable. "That's what scares me," he whispered. Hyunjin's heartbeat slowed painfully. Felix looked at him with tired, shining eyes. "You always make me feel too important." The confession nearly shattered him, because Felix had no idea how precious he already was to the members, to fans, to him, especially to him. Hyunjin lifted their joined hands slightly. "You are important." Stared at him silently, then finally, after hours of fear and tension and pretending, Felix smiled again, small, soft, real, the exact same smile from the practice room. The smile that started all this chaos, and somehow, seeing it now felt even more dangerous, because Hyunjin realized he would absolutely risk heartbreak just to see that smile again.